Thanks, David, and thanks for having us here today. I'm Brian Neville, and I'm from Bulls Creek in the Adelaide Hills. I have a small property there too. One of the things that hits me, and I've had older people tell me this too, years ago they started planting native or trees in the rivers. Then they started to complain that the rivers would stop flowing. That, in the summertime there'd be springs in various places along the river or on the creek, and anyway they stopped flowing. And one old bloke got up at the time and said, well, the only reason they've stopped flowing is you've planted all this stuff in the creek. And in an area the size of this stage here, there's plantings going on around in South Australia on good agricultural land. They probably have 300 plants planted in an area the size of the stage. Their idea is apparently that, well, not all of them survive, but every one of these plants too has got one of these plastic guards around them. Well, that comes from fossil fuels as well. But and they're just left there to rot. But all this vegetation they're planting is using water, and I would suggest that perhaps if we've got to have a licence to grow food, maybe they should have a licence to pay for the water that they're using in their native vegetation. So I welcome any comment from the panel on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Look, I'm just going to say I think the subject of water is well chosen. In the sense that if we go look for the moment, the points across the metropolis where the barricades are raised in the war between the deep state and the citizen, the ownership of water is obviously front and centre, and the strategic mind of the left understands that if you can deprive, if you can separate water from private property, there's just this massive, vast bureaucracy of people. So even within a kilometre of where we're sitting now, there's literally dozens and dozens of full-time professional tertiary graduates living in damp terraces in Glebe and Ultimo, wearing sandals and chewing muesli, whose life is determined to destroy the livelihood of farmers. And they have satisfied themselves that the human is the problem, that the farmer is in a vocation which no longer enjoys a social licence, and that their moral duty is to push farmers off their properties. And I think this is just one more example. The idea that you sort of make sure the water can't flow by placing impediments into it. The idea that you force farmers to put up fences on their own land to separate them, from the water. The deprivation of the separation of water from property rights. Queensland is right in the thick of it now, with their relatively recent laws aiming to make clear that farmers don't own the water or lands, on their own property. Interestingly, Rome's if you were to pick a symbol of Rome, of the Pax Romana, you might choose the Roman road, but the Roman aqueduct would be equally compelling as an image of the period. And when Rome fell, the first thing that happened was the aqueducts fell into disrepair and disuse because the Vandals and the Goths and the Visigoths and the Huns, they could not maintain the engineering fall of 1 in 200, which was required to make the water flow over the vast distances between the Roman metropolis and the source of fresh water. This is not a new, the control and command of water. Australia's only we've got this whole vast continent, we only use 30% of it because we are infantile in our approach to water. We harvest less than 1% of the fresh water, much less than 1% of the fresh water that falls on the continent. So I'm very happy if we are to move into a phase of aggressively confronting the deep state, the green industrial left, the subsidy machine to irrationality. I'm very happy for water to be in the top 5 causes.
Yeah.
Why the top 5?
Well,
Why not number 1?
Well, I say speech. For me,
You can't speak without water.
yeah, I think that you can't. Well, if you allow the state to censor your argument, you've virtually lost, before you begin. But I'm open-minded. I think. I don't think you can. I think it's wise strategically to pick, 5 or 6 causes, and to pick winnable causes. I suspect water. I think water is one of them. I think water is one of them.
That's a good point. I've been down in front of Parliament House in Adelaide and getting a petition signed opposing the right to take water levy on our farms, whether we use it or not. So we get charged a right to take water levy on our farms, whether we use it or not. And we've got the Adelaide University just up the road, and the amount of young people that were coming past saying, oh, how's this going to affect me? I said, do you want to eat clean, green, healthy food grown here in Australia, or do you want to eat the crap that's coming from overseas? Oh, no, we want to eat the clean, healthy food grown here. Well, I said, sign this. Because I said, if we don't get rid of this rot, you won't be eating it. I went to a global food forum in Sydney here a few years ago, and there was a banker on the panel. And he was actually gloating, and he actually said, and Brian was there as well, he can vouch for it, and this guy sat there and he said, I bought water for next to nothing, and excuse the language, and I'm going to make a shitload of money. I could have wrung his neck. Where did they get this water? They stole it from us, as I said earlier on. We can't do a damn thing without water and food. You say there's 5 things, Ross, and fair enough, but what's your number 1?
Well, I'd probably have 18's freedom of speech would be where I would start.
That's a good one.
I'm happy to have ownership of water. I would say we should make, if we want to take back territory, I would say we should commit ourselves to harvesting 1% of the fresh water that falls on this continent.
Well, I'm not even collecting 1% of the water that falls on the property.
Yeah.
Not even, and most farmers are the same.
I would then say I would declare war in the area of education. Yes. I would say we have to completely devolve education from the Commonwealth to the states, from the education unions to the principals, and from the education bureaucracies to the parents. And I go to war on it. I would expect to have a massive industrial campaign. I would expect teachers to go on strike all over New South Wales. I'd say, let's do it.
Yeah.
For sure.
You'd be a good Prime Minister.
Yes, John. Can I just add one footnote, though, to what Ross had just said about the education area, which, in principle, of course, as a federalist, I'm totally in favour of getting the Commonwealth out of the area, but we shouldn't forget that it is, but for the Commonwealth's intervention in the area of private, Catholic independent schools, we wouldn't have the independence of the school system we've got. So I think, while I'm all in favour of getting the Commonwealth out of government schooling, I think you have to keep the Commonwealth in favour of, involved with providing the finance which partially accounts for the costs of these people's which partially prevents people from having to pay twice for their children to go to school.
I think you're right. I think that corrected a great injustice of the Catholic system, particularly for poorer, the parochial system, not the rich Catholic system. But it was really just finance. The Commonwealth never interfered in the curriculum of the Catholic system. Keith.
There's another form of water we should talk about at this stage, David, and that is salt water. Australia has, I'm not sure if we have the most extensive coastal waters of any country in the world, but it's pretty close to it. We import the majority of our seafood. More than 50% of Australian seafood is imported. And if you look at the tins of stuff in the shelves, we import a huge amount of stuff from places like Thailand. part of the problem is politicians like the Berejiklian government, who, until there was a protest by recreational and professional fishermen, were going to isolate large parts of the coast where you couldn't presumably fish for it, on the grounds of the sustainability thesis. This is just insane. It is. I mean, I don't believe there are surveys about the fish that are in the water that come from bureaucrats in the department and academic people in universities. I don't believe any of it, because anybody who looks at the Australian coastline and goes fishing, you can catch huge amounts of fish in all these places where we're supposed to have scarcity or where the species are at risk. So I don't know what struck the Berejiklian government that this was going to be a good popular idea. It's as stupid an idea as they're banning on greyhound races. They're not listening to voters and electors. They're listening to bureaucrats, and the bureaucracy has been captured yet again by the Greens in this case. And the whole question of sustainability is one that nobody really questions. It sounds like a nice word, sounds, sort of justice, sustainability, but in fact it's a way of ruining huge parts of Australian agriculture, offshore fishing, and just about anything else to do with the local environment.